Good afternoon. Welcome to the August Community IT Innovators webinar series. Thank you for joining us today as we discuss how to leverage IT for success. My name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the President and CEO of Community IT. A few tips before we start the webinar today. We encourage you to interact with us by asking questions via the GoToWebinar chat feature. You can also connect with us on Twitter, and we can be followed at Community IT. Just a reminder to avoid multitasking during the webinar. You may just miss the best part. If you do miss the best part or you need to leave the webinar early, we will be posting links to the recording and slides on our website. In case you aren't familiar with Community IT, our skilled and certified team of IT professionals serves the greater Washington nonprofit community, helping organizations of all sizes and capacities to advance their mission through the effective use of technology. We're deeply invested in the nonprofit community. We've served over 900 nonprofits since 1993, and we take a strategic and collaborative approach that fits the unique needs and culture of nonprofit organizations. I've already introduced myself. Here's my contact info. And my co-pilot on today's journey will be our Chief Technology Officer, Matthew Eshelman. Hello, Matt. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for the introduction. My contact information here as well. And you can follow me on Twitter at MESHLEMAN. Looking forward to today's session.
Great. As am I. So let's dive right into it. We always have a lot to cover, and today is no different. So we're going to be covering three main topics in today's webinar. First, we want to define what we mean by IT success. It can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people, and we actually have a pretty rigorous definition for IT success that we want to go over. We want to talk about the things you can do to achieve success in your IT, and finally talk about some of the steps you can take in planning out getting to that achieving of IT success. So before we get started on that, I do want to kind of propose sort of a starting principle for us here at Community IT, and that's that information is an asset. So information is just as important to any organization as, the inventory in a warehouse or the finances that an organization has. And that in order for an organization to be successful, it needs to manage its information in the same way that it manages all of its other assets. So that's kind of the starting point for our discussion today. So let's start by talking a little bit more about how we would define IT success. And oftentimes when you ask this question, the answer you get is actually not about success at all, but about IT failure. So oftentimes when people talk about, if you ask the question, what is IT success? The answer that you'll get is actually a negative. Well, it's not IT failure. In other words, it's not data loss. It's not applications that don't work. It's not systems that are unavailable. Success in IT is not frustration, lost productivity. And this oftentimes reflects sort of a low bar for what we expect from IT at our organizations. And while there's truth that none of these things define success, and the lack of failure, on its own does not necessarily mean that you're being successful at IT. So what we'd like to propose today is a more rigorous framework for looking at IT success, and this is the infrastructure and operations maturity model that was developed by Gartner Consulting back in 2007. So this has been around for about 8 years now, and we're going to present this today and sort of use it as a basic framework for thinking about how to achieve success in IT at your organization. And this is a framework that's used by businesses, government agencies, and other organizations of all sizes. So simply put, the infrastructure and operations maturity model is a maturity model. So it's similar to the capability maturity model. It was developed back in the 80s. And it's essentially a 6-step, or a 6-level maturity model. The highest level is level 5. The lowest level is level 0. And we're going to go through and talk about what these different levels actually mean. So level 0 is survival, and in level 0 there's little or no focus. Um, and the corollary of this level is that if you don't focus on your IT, you're always going to be in survival mode. So a lack of sort of focus or attention on IT infrastructure and operations is going to lead to being in a basic survival mode. Level 1 is awareness. Um, and I like this level, and one of the reasons that I like it is that it means that if you're aware of the problem, you're already one level up. So if you come into a situation, or if you're in a situation where it seems like you're in survival mode, if you're aware that you're in survival mode and aware that you need to get out of being in survival mode, then you've already moved one level up the maturity model. So that's a good, that's encouraging. Um, it means being aware of the importance of IT. So it really means kind of agreeing with that starting principle that information is an asset and that managing information is an important part of every organization. Level 2 is committed. And so level 2 means starting to make a commitment to improving IT through managing it. And it doesn't mean piecemeal, haphazard, temporary fixes, but an acknowledgement that IT needs to be managed throughout the organization and by the organization. And we'll go into a lot more detail later on when we start talking about achieving IT success in terms of how you can kind of get to the committed level. But it really means moving into more of a managed environment. So level 1 awareness, level 0 survival. In both of those levels, you have sort of putting out of fires, ad hoc responses. Um, those things need to happen just for basic survival. But to be at level 2, it really means management, having some sort of process in place, whether it's informal or informal. So it doesn't need to be, oftentimes when you talk about process, people think of these big process flow charts and diagrams. A process can be very simple and very basic, but it means having repeatable steps that the organization takes. Level 3, proactive. Oh, and one other thing I missed, basic customer service. So that's another sign of a committed organization, that it's providing basic customer service to its staff around IT, and that it sees its staff and the rest of the organization as sort of recipients of IT service. Level 3, proactive. So level 1 and 2 are all about reacting, putting out fires, keeping the ship from sinking. And people often complain about being at that level, but you do have to put out the fires. But once you do, you can move on to the next level of being proactive. And getting proactive requires standardization, it requires governance, and it requires policy. And those basic processes that you've just started to implement in level 2, those get refined in level 3. So you're starting to have, you're not, you don't only just have processes and repeatable steps, but you're looking at those processes and finding out what can we do to make them work for us a little bit better. And Matt, feel free to jump in at any point. Um, Level 4, service aligned. At level 4, the IT is really aligned with the overall business objectives of the company or the organization, and it's delivering consistent and competitive services. And so the IT in level 4 really understands what the business goals and the mission objectives of the organization are, and it's organized in such a way that it's really helping the organization meet those goals. And then level 5, business partnership, is focused on innovation. And that's where IT is really increasing the value of the entire organization. So at level 4, IT is maximizing its value in and of itself. So IT is a service being delivered to the rest of the organization. At level 5, IT is not just a service being delivered to the rest of the organization, but it's actually a critical core business function of the organization that's increasing value everywhere else. A very simple example of that, or a very obvious example, would be Amazon, where IT is not just, obviously Amazon has to have a variety of IT systems in place to do its work, but IT is actually increasing or creating the value for the entire organization. So just in summary, the infrastructure and operations maturity model goes from survival to awareness to committed to proactive to service aligned to business partnership. And I think one of the things that I really like about this maturity model is its emphasis on process. And so achieving IT maturity is a process, and it's impossible to reach level 5 without maturing through the earlier levels first. So for organizations that are, in survival mode right now, um, the goal shouldn't be to make IT a business partner with the rest of the organization. Rather, it should be creating awareness throughout the organization that there's a problem and that there needs to be an organizational response to solving that problem. And just by doing that, you've moved from level 0 to level 1. And then from level 1, then moving forward into level 2 means getting the organization to acknowledge that IT needs to be well managed. And in getting the organization to acknowledge that and start to put basic management processes and structures in place, you move from awareness to starting to be committed. And so it, each step along the way has certain tangible actions that you can take, but you need to take those. There's no way to kind of leapfrog from awareness all the way to service aligned.
And I think, I mean, the fact that it is a process and it is a step, I think can also help to, just provide some realistic expectations around, how to proceed, and also, so that organizations maybe don't get overwhelmed if you're, sitting there and you feel like you're really in survival mode and everything is just kind of reactionary. The goal isn't necessarily, to kind of have everything, all of your IT systems aligned with your business processes and your business actions and really looking to scale the organization. It is that incremental process, the incremental improvement that you can make throughout the organization, and you'll eventually get there. And I think it's good to have those achievable next steps to look at, as opposed to looking to try to make some big gigantic business leap. So we've worked with a lot of organizations over a long period of time, and you can see that success, incremental change on subtle improvements over time, really do make an impact for how an organization can move through this process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. And it can also be helpful to kind of milestone progress as you're going through it. So if you're trying to get out of a situation where you're in survival mode, and a year later you just have some basic processes in place, it's kind of easy to get discouraged and say, "Oh man, IT's never going to get better." But if you're benchmarking yourself against this maturity model, you can say, "Hey, we've gone all the way from 0 to 2, and we're going to make progress to get to step 3 over the next year." So it can be a way of kind of having an objective viewpoint of where the organization is. In fact, I got a nice quote here from Gartner, and what they say is that Gartner's IT infrastructure and operations maturity model helps organizational leaders evaluate their maturity with respect to people, process, technology, and business management, and establish a roadmap for increasing levels of maturity to service alignment and partnering with the business. So you want to ask yourself, where are we? Where are we starting from, and what's the plan? Where are we going to go? And I think it's really important to be realistic. Oftentimes, people will just immediately want to go all the way to level 4, but the reality is that could be a 3 or 4 year process. And also, the investment, both in terms of time and resources, financial resources, to get from level 2 to level 4, it just may not be a priority for the organization. So it's important to kind of to keep that in mind, that the improvements that you're going to make in your organization's IT maturity are going to require investments, and those need to be aligned and coordinated with the other priorities that the organization has. And I just skipped ahead to this slide, how to prioritize. So this is a helpful framework, and we're going to move on to the next step in the webinar. But this is important. If you're in an organization and the leadership is really really connects with frameworks, this can be a great one to kind of help present what you need to do in IT to senior leadership or to the board. If you're in an organization that this kind of model is potentially overkill, it's nice to kind of just have it in the back of your mind as your own internal guide and reference point. So now that we've defined what IT success is in a rigorous way, let's talk a little bit more about achieving IT success. What are the steps that you can take? And I actually just read that in the quote that I just read, that infrastructure and operations leaders can evaluate their maturity with respect to people, process, technology, and then Gartner also adds business management because they're Gartner. They have to, they got to add something else. That's their secret sauce, the business management. But I'm sure almost everybody out there has heard this before many, many times. It's all about people, process, technology, and technology is in a small font. It's really the people and the process. There are a lot of studies that have been done that show that, failed technology projects are often a result of, people not being committed or inadequately trained, processes not being put in place or sufficiently implemented, and that sometimes the technology solution itself has very little to do with the success or failure of the technology project. So we've all heard that. This is something that Gartner, as I mentioned, incorporates into their overall maturity model. They have a much more complicated grid than this that basically evaluates moving along the maturity model in each of these four areas: people, process, technology, and business management. And really, Gartner's whole approach is that you can't get your people to level 4 if your technology is at level 1. That these things all have to kind of move together and work together. And we'll post a link to the Gartner paper. It's pretty short. It's like 4 pages. It's very interesting if anybody would like to read that. So this is the advice, and it's not wrong. People, process, technology, but sometimes when I hear that too much, sort of feel like it's okay. What do you need to do to bake a cake? Well, you need ingredients, you need cooking, and you need an oven. And it's like, well, yeah, I guess that's all true, but if you've never baked a cake before, that's not really that helpful. Like, how do these things combine with each other to give you that amazing end result of a beautiful cake? So how do we combine people, process, and technology in a way that improves maturity, IT maturity, and leads to IT success? So what we'd like to propose now is a simple framework, something that we use here at Community IT to help sort of evaluate and think about IT maturity both internally and at the clients that we work with. So this is our pretty simple framework. It expands a little bit beyond people, process, and maturity. I'm sorry, people, process, and technology. And it basically starts with governance. We'll get into a lot more detail about that. But governance, management, information systems, and infrastructure. Those are the 4 categories that we're going to be talking about. What are the concrete things that you can do in each of those 4 categories to help improve your IT maturity? So let's start with governance. What is governance? Besides a scary big word that freaks people out and makes them think that they're going to have a lot of documents and bureaucracy in order to get governance in place. That can be true at larger organizations, but it can be a very simple thing at smaller organizations. And governance is actually a fundamental part of any organization's success. So the definition that we like to use here is that governance is a formal structure for making sound decisions related to IT and executing on those decisions. And so governance consists of 3 things in our view. Number 1, it consists of leadership. And we'll talk specifically about what leadership has to do in order to exercise good IT governance. It requires organizational structures that define ownership of IT in the organization. And then it requires supporting processes. So basically, if you have the right leadership in place, the right organizational structures, and supporting processes, then you're well on the way to achieving really solid IT governance. You're in a good position to make sound decisions for the organization around IT and to execute on those decisions. And it's we can't really get into the specifics of governance without also then immediately talking about IT management and the importance of IT management. And so the interplay between governance and management is really about the strategic alignment of the organization. Um, so the leadership in the organization uh, defines the business goals for the organization. So every organization should have an overall organizational strategy or business strategy that defines specific business goals. Those need to set the context for your IT strategy and your IT goals. If you're making decisions about IT solutions and not considering the business goals of the organization, then you're setting yourself up for failure. And you've broken that link between management and governance.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point to make, and having the business goals really guide the kind of how IT is implemented or the technology solutions that are chosen. I think will help prevent organizations from investing in the new and the shiny and kind of following the what's a neat technology when when if it's considered in the context of what are we looking to do as an organization, what are we going to accomplish, and then which technology tools are going to help support that business. You're going to be in a much stronger position and a much more effective position to then from that position pick the technology. Develop that roadmap and really build out the capacity that's going to meet that organizational requirement first, as opposed to being excited about this organization's giving this free license or this organization is providing this free training, and aligning the technology with the business goals.
Mm-hmm. So for governance, you need to ask who's the leadership of the organization. How is leadership going to be involved with IT decisions? What is the role of the leadership with regards to the budget? Early on and for smaller organizations, this may be simple and straightforward, but as the organization grows and gets more complicated and sophisticated, it's important to keep IT front and center within the organization's leadership. And leadership needs to make decisions with the primary owner of the technology for the organization. And there's often substantial overlap, between the leadership and the ownership. But at some point, especially for larger organizations, those, will ultimately need to diverge. And the owner is responsible for presenting the decisions that need to be made to the leadership and really helping the leadership make good decisions in the context of IT goals and business decisions. And we'll come back to this point because in general, the ownership of IT at an organization ultimately falls on the management. So management is IT management at an organization is responsible for the planning process, and essentially working with the leadership to put together a solid plan. Management is responsible for executing on the plan, and then once the plan has been executed, for the ongoing support and maintenance of the information systems that have been put in place. And we wanted to say a little bit about what we've seen as the changing role of IT over the last 5 to 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And I think the changing role of IT has definitely been the consumerization of IT, and essentially the advent of a lot of cloud-based technologies that are really focused on being easy to use, and so IT has gone, the technology tools have gone from being maybe very kind of scary or daunting tools that require a lot of training and research and time spent in manuals to kind of get to work to things that are very much more user friendly, more intuitive to use, and so that's certainly being brought from people's personal experience into their expectation of how the technology should work at the organization, and then a lot of there's I think a pretty substantial change in just the overall organizational culture. I know the traditional kind of top-down IT director role where the IT is kind of identifying solutions and then driving their implementation, I think has really changed to I think IT in the best case is really facilitating the effective use of technologies by working with the departments, with the programs, and so it's more of a kind of a collaborative and bottom-up approach as opposed to I think what has traditionally been a top-down approach in the IT world. I think, and then all of this, does kind of wrap up with, this topic about, IT is really around enabling that effective use of technology. So having people, providing people with the tools that they need to do, that they need to do their work well, kind of from anywhere, from any location, from any device, and a number of different constructs. So I think IT has certainly changed dramatically. I've been, at community IT for actually just 15 years, and it's certainly, been a pretty dramatic shift in the technology solutions that we implement, the way that we support our clients, the way that they're consuming and using technology. Yeah, and it really has represented, an evolving skill set and a set of tools that are used in this space.
Yep. So really the owner of IT, the IT manager, if you will, needs to get the requirements from the leadership. And the requirements, this is just a small sample of what those might look like. Business continuity requirements, how often do the systems need to be available? Reporting requirements, are there compliance requirements? Are you required to be FERPA compliant? Do you have FOIA requests? Do you need to be HIPAA compliant? Those are all business needs that need to be communicated to the owner of IT. Um, are there automation or efficiency requirements? The need to have access to mobile devices? What are the ongoing support requirements? Do you need to have white glove service for the staff in the organization, or is it more of a, serve yourself model? Again, those are all things that IT certainly needs to have input on. And as Matt said, there needs to be a dialogue. But at the same time, at the end of the day, these are business requirements for the organization, and you don't want IT defining these. What you do need from IT is for IT to provide information, such as outcome measurements, performance metrics, and then all of the information systems, which we'll talk about in more detail. So, as Matt said, there really needs to be a dialogue between IT and the business, which we represented earlier in this framework as a dialogue between leadership and IT management. Now, for smaller organizations, the owner and the manager are often going to be the same person, and that person's often going to have other responsibilities as well. So you can imagine for a 5 to 10 person organization, maybe the director of finance is not only one of the key leaders of the organization, but also the person who owns IT for the organization. But larger organizations start to see that role split. You need a dedicated IT manager who maybe reports to the CFO, for example. Um, but in that case, the CFO may still be the owner of IT. Even larger organizations, will establish a CIO position as the owner, and also as one of the key leaders for the organization. So the framework, that we're presenting here isn't meant to be prescriptive in terms of the different positions that you need to have. It's really more to identify and highlight the roles and functions that must be performed in an organization for IT to be successful. And that's one of the real values of this framework, is that it's flexible. So it's defining the roles, but then how you fill those roles is going to vary, from organization to organization. So we're not defining a specific structure for fulfilling those roles. So leadership, in conjunction with the owner of IT, they need to work together to make good decisions about technology. That essentially is governance and IT management. And governance is really important for supporting good IT management. That's another key here, that without good governance, it's hard for IT managers to be successful. And it's something that really, increasing levels of maturity happens throughout the organization, where goals, mission, they're all sort of aligned. So, in conclusion to this section, to kind of keep moving up the ladder, so to speak, with your governance and management, you really need leadership that's willing and able to have dialogue. You need organizational structures that enable that conversation. And that can be as simple as, the owner of IT, the IT manager, meets with the CFO on a regular basis, has certain reports that they present to the CFO, has an ongoing process That's the third thing that supports that dialogue and that alignment. So I want to talk about a few pitfalls here that we see commonly around IT management. So one is to hire a technician or a technical expert and make them the de facto IT manager. And that can work. I mean, there are plenty of cases where we've seen that work, but it's not guaranteed to work. And there's plenty of times where we've seen it not work. And the main reason for that is managing technology is very different from having hands-on technical skills. And it's important to be aware of that difference. And if you're not aware of that difference, you might put someone in the role of managing technology who really only has hands-on technical skills, and that can lead to a lot of problems.
Yeah, I think in this case, this is often the scenario where, there's often a lot of really great technology implemented, but it, maybe doesn't reflect, the best use of resources. You may have, a really fantastic, server or SAN infrastructure when, the organization doesn't really have a lot of, IT resources on-prem, or maybe they built, a big, custom database because maybe that person's very talented in that area, but again, it may not be meeting the actual business goals. So I think those are some of the biggest flags in terms of hiring technical experts and then making them having them in that IT manager role.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of there's a saying in business management in general, that people will focus on the things that they're good at. And, another risk there is if you hire someone who's really good at, managing SANs, you're going to end up with a lot of SANs, storage area networks. You're going to end up with a lot of servers because that's what they're good at and that's what they want to focus on. So that's another challenge, another aspect to that challenge. Another pitfall is to outsource completely. Outsourcing can be an effective option. I mean, obviously, our business model is basically built on outsourcing various parts of IT expertise and support. But outsourcing, and we've seen this firsthand, can become a problem when it becomes abdication. So there still needs to be someone in-house who is fundamentally responsible. In other words, owns IT for the organization. You really can't outsource ownership. Someone in-house needs to own it. And as a result, governance needs to remain in-house as well. So you can outsource certain aspects of management, but we've seen organizations try to outsource everything, and that can create a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I would even go so far as saying, the kind of the popular outsourced CIO model, we see, can work well in interim solutions or interim scenarios, but that the ownership of the overall IT still needs to reside with the organization I think, to really make sure that it's firmly rooted in kind of the best organizational practices. So, again, outsourcing it all, just kind of saying, I don't want to think about IT, you do it. May feel good, may sound good, but I think over time that approach does lead to problems when maybe the direction that your technology infrastructure and projects is going then starts to drift away from what would truly be best aligned with the technology needed to support the organization's mission.
Yeah. And the third pitfall is trying to do too much yourself, especially for smaller and newer, younger organizations who might have a technically savvy business leader, especially early on in the life of the organization. They can get a lot done in terms of planning, implementation, even supporting of technology. But at some point, business leaders and nonprofit leaders need to stay focused on the organization and run the risk of either getting too wrapped up in the technology or letting it fall to the wayside. So that's a third pitfall to look out for. So the key goal, one of the key goals that management has, one of the most important, I think, is in planning. And as we've discussed, that means aligning technology with the business needs. It means understanding the solution options and then prioritizing IT investments. Those are really the three keys of successful IT planning. And IT manager is the owner of those three key responsibilities: aligning technology with business needs, understanding there's so many IT solutions out there, understanding the options, and then prioritizing the investments. And that leads us to our third and final agenda item today, and that's planning for IT success. So if you've got the right governance and management structures in place, then you're well on your way to making good decisions around what sort of IT solutions you need to have, what sort of IT processes you need to put in place, what sort of structures you need, and that's all going to help lead to increased IT maturity. So the management is really the one who's responsible for helping with the planning of the information systems that you're going to use and the infrastructure that those information systems reside on. And it's the manager's job to navigate the what I like to call the IT trilemma. And a trilemma is, the classic 2 out of 3. You can have it cheap, fast, or well done, but you can't have all three. And we see that a lot in with regards to IT solutions. And this is really the IT trilemma is something that's important to keep in mind, because when you're investigating a new solution and you go to their YouTube page and you watch all their amazing demos, they're going to promise the world. And the reality is you're going to get generally 2 out of these 3, but you're not going to get all 3. So in other words, you're going to get a solution that, if you need a low cost solution, um, and you need to have a lot of really specific functionality, then chances are you're going to get a solution that doesn't have very good performance, that doesn't work very well. Or if you need a solution that works really well and has all of the functionality that you need, then chances are it's going to be a more expensive solution. So I think often what we see is organizations have the tendency to implement free solutions, so they really drive down that cost leg of the trilemma, but then they have solutions that either don't work very well or don't really meet the actual needs of the organization. And so the goal of the manager is to sort of understand the trilemma involved around any IT solution and help the organization make the right decisions in terms of the trade-offs that you need to make. In some cases, it's just not possible to spend more money on an IT solution. That's fine. But then you need to determine, all right, well, where are we going to compromise? Are we going to have a solution that has reduced functionality, reduced performance? What are we going to, basically learn to live with in those cases? So then the IT manager needs to make sure that the organization has solutions in place, and those are really the information systems. And sort of broken it down into 5 categories here. Um, it's important for organizations to have information systems in each of these 5 areas. These tend to be pretty universal. So you need to have some kind of internal communication system. So that could be, email. It could be a collaboration solution. It could be a chat solution, some kind of project management tool where you're collaborating on projects. There are variety is an understatement. There are a plethora of options out there in terms of how you're going to communicate internally. And so it's important to figure out what those solutions are. I apologize. Hope you all can't hear that. Um, then there's external communication. So how are you going to communicate with the outside world? Whether it's through a website, whether it's through social media, what is the method that the organization is going to use to communicate externally? And then there's 3 sets of information systems related to management. So you need to have some way of managing your program. So that could be a case management system. It could be a constituent relationship management system or a CRM. That's going to vary widely based on the function that the organization is performing. Organizations still have a lot of document needs, whether it's Word, Excel, Visio, more sophisticated documents like a Photoshop file, and you need some way of managing those documents. And for years and years and years, the file server has been sort of the de facto document management solution. But there are others, and we're actually kind of moving into an era in which There are more advanced and sophisticated document management solutions that are really coming down in price and performing a lot better. And so it's, in the past, that was a pretty easy decision to make, and now it's becoming something that deserves further attention. And then finally, financial management is obviously a critical information system.
Yeah, and I would say with all of these, particularly on the documents, really understanding how what your organization's business goals are can really help make the decision around documents and kind of how you're managing those assets go a lot smoother. I would say in general, what we're seeing is organizations, I think, being a bit more granular in that approach. So loading more documents into their case management or their CRM so that they're able to more easily search and track their interactions with their constituents. And then other data, typically digital assets. There's been a real explosion in the amount of kind of pictures and particularly video, and those types of assets don't really sit well anymore on your kind of local file server, and so organizations are investing in systems that provide better management and categorizing and cataloging of those systems. And if your organization has I think a well articulated vision on how you expect to use the different assets that your organization has, it can make finding those technology solutions to manage those assets, much more streamlined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And again, this is where prioritization comes into play as well, because you can't tackle everything at once. And so it becomes a question of, well, what's the most important thing for the organization to tackle? Maybe you have a file server and you're tracking all of your constituents' information in an Excel spreadsheet. Which is more important, coming up with a better document management system or coming up with a replacement, like a database that would replace that Excel spreadsheet? That's a business decision. That's something that the IT management needs to educate the leadership of the organization around, and again have that dialogue with the leadership about. But ultimately, that's a business decision that needs to be made by both parties, by the IT manager as well as the organizational leaders. And that's where the importance of governance comes in again, because you don't want the leadership saying, "I don't care, just fix it, go implement something." That's kind of back in survival mode almost, back in level 0. Um, so that's information systems. And then infrastructure. We've obviously seen a big shift in a lot of the decision making that needs to happen by IT management around infrastructure. As things have moved to the cloud, increasingly organizations don't need to spend as much attention on the hardware, so to speak, the wires and pliers. That's not the right term, but even with data in the cloud, there are three sort of really critical components to a solid IT infrastructure that need attention. One is connectivity. So if all of your data is in the cloud, you obviously need to be able to connect to it. That means connectivity from your office, whether it's wired or wireless. That means connectivity from outside the office. So making sure that staff have good connectivity, that's an important part, and that's an infrastructure solution of which decisions need to be made around. Um, Security is critical, and we have several webinars actually in the past year in which we kind of do a deep dive on IT security issues. We'll probably have another one in a couple months. The threat landscape, as you all know, has just continues to get more just continues to expand, and the number and types of threats that everyone is dealing with now in IT, it just continues to grow. And so it's important that security is a top priority for IT management and for organizations making decisions and planning around their IT. And then finally, devices. What kind of devices is the organization going to use? At the end of the day, in order to use IT, you need to have some kind of device, whether it's a laptop, a workstation, a tablet. There's a monitor involved. You're probably printing something out. You're connecting to a wireless device. There are all of these like little devices everywhere, and making good decisions about which devices an organization is going to invest in and how it's going to manage those devices, that's an important part of IT management.
Yeah, I would think, and especially on the devices, we've certainly seen, uh, I think a lot of the organizations, I think the nonprofit sector was probably ahead of the rest of the world in terms of, the phenomenon of bring your own device. And I think, a lot, community IT and a lot of our clients, of course, everybody was using their personal device to access business resources because I think that, the mindset of frugality was first. And I think, you know, the device management policy, I think, is in general has been very wide open, and I think that that pendulum's starting to swing back a little bit as organizations, I think, look at their overall, security policy, device management. What does it mean for us to have all of these different types of devices connecting and accessing our assets, our organizational information, and we're starting to see, I think, a bit more attention paid to, the reality of kind of what that means for an organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those areas where not paying attention to it, kind of lack of visibility into it, can definitely cause problems. So this is it. If you want IT to be successful at your organization, it's all in this slide right here. This is the 100,000-foot view. So the governance management. So governance, really kind of establishing that bedrock in the organization that can support management, having qualified management in place that can assist with the planning process and help make good decisions around the information systems and infrastructure that the organization needs to manage its information assets. That's kind of that's what we've been presenting here in a nutshell, and we really believe and have seen this model help to improve IT maturity at a lot of organizations. So that brings us to the end of our webinar. Want to quickly uh, promote the next webinar. We love doing these webinars. We do them every month. Typically, we do them on the third Thursday of the month. So in September, on September 17th, 4 o'clock Eastern Time, Mark Kramer and Nura Boki are going to be presenting a training that they've put together on training staff, end users, in basic end user IT security. So we'd mentioned earlier the importance of security. And really, I think the growing consensus is that there's never going to be a software solution or a doodad that's going to solve all of the security problems, and that fundamentally security is kind of a human issue, and the best way to really tackle IT security issues is to train staff. And so we invite not only you but also your staff to participate in this webinar and learn some basic tips and tricks that we can all use to protect our information and the information of our organization. So we really thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your attention. We would ask that you fill out the survey that we send after the webinar. Like I said, we've been doing these for several years now. We really like them. We really rely on your feedback to improve these webinars. So please take a quick minute to fill that out. We will be mailing out a link to the slides and recording. They are linked on our website as well. All of our previous webinars are linked there, and the slides are on our SlideShare site. The recordings are on our YouTube channel. And we invite you to connect with us via social media. So we have about 10 minutes left today, and we would like to use that time to answer any questions that you might have. We would also be happy to relate any experiences that our listeners have had and our attendees have had related to any of these, any times when you've seen some of this at work in your organization. And I guess no questions. I hope it was all clear. Let's give another minute here. Oh, great! This is a good. So one of the I'm just going to go ahead and just read this verbatim. So this was from Orson Moon. Thank you for sending this in, Orson. There are now good, well-attended peer-to-peer forums for discussing technology solutions, including forums specifically for nonprofit tech. You can usually find reasonably helpful commentary on a tool or system you're exploring. But do you know of an active forum for sharing IT management wisdom, where we might share and discuss actual plans, policies, process documents, etc.? Matt, are you aware of any such forum?
I mean, I think here in the DC area, I think the thing that comes to mind would be the CIO for Good forum, and I think that's something where it's specifically for IT leaders in nonprofits to kind of get together and share best practices. That's it's actually non-vendors are not permitted in that, and I think while there is I think a significant discussion around technology solutions, I think that's an area where those kind of that learning and best practices might be shared. So I think if you're in the DC area, that would be one thing to check out, and that actually might be a nationwide. They may have some nationwide chapters as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be one resource to check out. And again, I think N10 has been, I think, making some dedicated improvement in that area in terms of kind of providing and equipping organizations to talk about technology and best practices around that. And so, I think N10 is also going to be, I think, an increasingly good resource for answering these types of questions.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. And N10 actually has a new conference. A lot of you may be familiar with the classic N10 conference, the Nonprofit Tech Conference, which is in the spring. But last year they added a new conference called Leadership Change Summit, or LCS, and it's a smaller, more focused conference that is really about sort of changing organizations in exactly the ways that we've described here in this webinar today. I think they might be full for this year's fall conference, but that's definitely something to go to their site and check out. Um, and that's a 3-day conference where they really encourage people to come with specific problems or change goals in mind. And the goal is to have them, kind of go through an intensive 3-day course and come away with not only a plan of action, but also a networking community that they've engaged with, that they can kind of bring these sorts of questions to. So I would encourage everyone to kind of check the LCS out as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd say moving on to some of the other questions. One good one here is I think leadership is very focused on mission, and it's hard to get them to care about technology. And how can IT management change that? And I think it's a great question. It's a great point. Obviously in the nonprofit sector, we are focused and energized by the mission, by the work, by the work that we do. So I think one thing or one way to approach getting leadership excited about technology is to not necessarily talk about the technology itself, but talk about what the technology may enable them to do. So for example, if you kind of provide direct service to to individuals, you might want to talk about how you can provide better service to those people or connect them to more resources, and then once people are excited about doing more or being more engaged or providing better reporting or providing more services, and the way through that, or the way to do that is through successfully implementing and adopting a technology solution. So again, I wouldn't, I think it's build on that success of what does energize people, which is the mission, and then start to build that bridge to here's what we want to do, here's what we want to accomplish. Well, here's some of here are the ways that we're going to get there, and it's going to require this technology solution, which is going to be able to give us that capability.
Mm-hmm. It's really about connecting the dots between the technology solution and the mission goals. And I think as long as, I mean, maybe the hardest part and maybe part of what you're struggling with is just getting their attention. And that ultimately becomes kind of for lack of a better word, a political issue. Like, how do you get your leadership's attention? How do you get them to listen to you on certain issues? Um, and that's just kind of that's just a basic organizational challenge. If they are listening to you, then like Matt said, finding ways to connect the dots between the business goals or the mission goals and what's happening in IT is the best way to kind of open their eyes to the IT problems. And I think at the end of the day, like it's I don't think like getting leadership that's really focused on the mission to care about IT is necessarily important, but to get them to make the decisions and listen to the issues and help make the decisions around prioritizing, that's really I think what is best to aim for.
Mhm.
Sometimes also I think senior leadership feels intimidated by technology, and that's where again like one of the key responsibilities of the IT manager is to, I think I had a slide about it, align technology with business needs to help explain technology in a way that's understandable by the business leaders. That's one of the three top responsibilities of an IT manager. And again, that's why putting a technician in that role can be a problem, because explaining IT to business leaders in a way that they're going to understand and connect with is not always an easy thing to do. But that's a critical function that IT has to play. And I think if you can demystify um, the technology a little bit, then it definitely opens up the dialogue even more. And we've certainly seen that happen where, we when we start to have that dialogue and show that we really want to talk to the senior leadership about technology, the ice starts to thaw, and then the conversations start to happen more easily. So I would just encourage persistence.
Mhm.
Before we move on to the next question, someone mentioned that N10 has a monthly IT directors / leaders call. So that's also, I think you can connect to that through the N10 website, n10.org. I've heard great things about that call. We are not nonprofit IT directors, so we do not participate in that, but I've heard really good feedback about that call.
Mhm.
Um, Matt, I'm going to pose this question to you. What's the best way to manage risk on a limited budget?
Yeah, I saw that question in there, and
I hope
I
you were
think it
thinking
goes
about
back
it.
to, I like your IT director trilemma uh, decision, and so I think talking about security, I think it's good to articulate what security means in your context, uh, because I would say, there's some base level things that all organizations could and should be doing that don't require a lot of kind of time, or a lot of expensive systems. We kind of talk about security as foundational practices, patching your operating system, patching the third-party applications on your computer, having a password policy in place, and having an antivirus software installed. So those that's kind of the key foundational pieces of your IT security. And then I think going from there, then you can start thinking about, in your specific context, what does IT security mean? Do you have sensitive data that uh, can't let out because it contains personally identifiable information? Do you have information that can't be visible because it contains, I don't know, trade secrets or other kind of proprietary information? Um, and and I think really kind of clearly articulate what does security mean in your context. This is a bit of a far field, but we talk about the security triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And those are three aspects of security. And I would say in general, most organizations that we work with aren't necessarily concerned about the confidentiality of their information. If your file server is accessed, hey, no big deal. But they are concerned about the availability to that information. So, and depending on what the focus is, you may take different outcomes. I would say if you don't have a lot of money to kind of spend, and at some point you're going to need to spend money on some technology solutions, you do need to invest in your people, and that may be trainings, because security is always going to, threats are always going to target the weakest link, and so if staff are, keeping their post-it notes with their passwords on their desktop, you can have the most expensive technology solution in the world, but it's not going to, it's going to be subverted by kind of a personal practice. So, I think you can accomplish a lot through time and education and training of users in terms of what it means to have a secure network in your organization.
Hmm. The other thing I would add is that often increased security means increased or decreased convenience. And so generally, the more secure you make a system, the more difficult it is for the user to use. So, for example, not allow remote access, to certain systems, or require two-factor authentication to get into certain systems. Those things all kind of reduce your risk and improve security, but they also increase the annoyance, to the average staff person in the organization. So that is a way to kind of manage risk on a budget, but it does require, buy-in from the staff because you're making their lives, more difficult in some ways. But that kind of gets to what Matt was saying about the training. Generally, if you can make the case for why you need to do that, um, then you can generally get the buy-in. So, for example, at a healthcare clinic, making access to patient information incredibly inconvenient, that some people might complain about it, but at the end of the day, I think everyone there would understand like why you're doing that. So it's just kind of having that sort of dialogue. Great. Well, we are now at 5 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciated your participation. Again, we'll be sending a link to the slides out, and we encourage you to join us next month for that very topic, basic end user training around IT security. Take care.
Thank you.